Welcome to the Agile Lawyer Mediator. I am Dr. Debra Dupree, and I'll be facilitating our 40-minute webinar today. So thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. And just a few words of introduction about how our program will work today. We are in the webinar format, which means that not everyone's video will be displayed. However, you can easily put your comments and questions into the chat box, which depending upon where your control panel is, I frequently put mine at the bottom of the screen. You can certainly move yours to the top of the screen. And that way it's just a little easier to get there. And depending on how it shows up, you might want to go all the way over to more. And at the very top, at least on my menu, is the chat feature. And I'm sure many of you have participated in the chat box before. You can either send a message to everyone in the program or specify who you want it to go to, including myself. So I thank Christy, Therese, Richard, Sarah for being here today. I know we have more people joining us. And I thank you for taking the time out of your day to engage and participate and continue to learn more about what's going on. So I like to refer to myself as the mindset doc because I am a psychologist and I do work around the mindset. And so how we show up significantly impacts those that we deal with. And this is particularly true as mediators for people in conflict. And so I like to share with my fellow mediators, having come from the behavioral science world, just what does it mean to bring the brain and the heart together. And so if I would, I just want to make sure everyone is able to view the PowerPoint. And so if you could go ahead and do a thumbs up or put a yes in the chat box, I would greatly appreciate that. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page before we get there. Okay. Great, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, great. Okay, now this program is being recorded, and we do make the recording available in our LinkedIn group for the Agile Lawyer Mediator. And so that's something you will be invited to join that. And we keep people posted on new events, new resources, of course, our recordings, and other exciting opportunities as they emerge. And so this is an opportunity to share with your colleagues as far as challenges, ideas, and opportunities that you might experience in mediation. Now, I think we all know that COVID-19 has brought around a rapid shift in how we do business. And for many of us, a rapid shift to doing mediations online. I actually have done mediations and other forms of work online for several years, but certainly many people prefer that in-person connection. Well, we don't have that opportunity now, and it's been quite surprising and exciting, actually, to learn that online mediation has actually been powerfully successful. For lots of different reasons. And I'm going to share with you a couple of things from a survey we've had going on now for the last several months. And we will be publishing those results at a free event on January 21st, 4 o'clock Pacific time, to mark your calendars. And of course, continue to follow the Agile Lawyer Mediator or be part of the Agile Lawyer Mediator group in LinkedIn so that you are kept abreast as to the links on how to join that exciting presentation. So with that then, I want to just let you know that I myself have been a mediator now for actually 27 years. And so it's hard to believe it's been that long. And why I get so excited about training in this field is that from the day of when I was trained in mediation and to the types of mediator training now available, it definitely has followed more of the legal applications. And so what I've realized over the last several years in partnering with my colleague Harold Coleman with the AAAmediation.org is that while steeped in process and steeped in deep understanding of the applicable laws, I realized I had a tool bag full of strategies that many mediators with a legal background weren't familiar with. And so that's why I've been so excited over these last few years, particularly since COVID, to partner with colleagues like Harold Coleman, Susan Guthrie, Mark Lassiter, Greg Relier, in terms of bringing that extra spice, shall we say, to the field of mediation, and just what are some of the tactics that we as behavioral scientists might use in working with people. And so, again, I'm passionate about teaching. I love educating. I actually taught for Cal Washington School of Law for 5 years in their ADA program before the law school started to see a decline in their population. And I also like being very active in contributing to the field. And so I'm pleased to announce that I just joined the board of directors for the Southern California Mediation Association, participating in my first board meeting just this morning. And so I'm looking forward to being in that kind of climate. Now, I don't know about you. Certainly the COVID-19 induced working conditions has been tremendous for millions, billions across the world. At the same time, it's actually created new opportunities. It's actually expanded our outreach in ways that we might not have ever done it before. And so I'll bring to you some ideas about what we'll cover today. First and foremost, gaining some insights about applying some neuroscience elements to managing people in mediation. This actually was an outgrowth from a program we just facilitated last Friday, 1 week ago, when I collaborated with Greg Relier and a couple of others on designing a program for the San Diego Superior Court panel mediators as part of their ongoing continuing mediation education units. And it was very successful, well attended, and my whole piece then was on the neuroscience of behavior. And the feedback we got from people was tremendous. And so there's a lot to be learned here in terms of how people show up in conflict. And then I'm going to share with you some key findings from our survey. Not all the findings, because we're actually still taking in results, but there are a couple of key things that I think is relevant to share with you so that you have some insight as to just what to expect. So here are the 4 topics that I'm going to cover today. Managing the brain's negativity bias. We all have it. And there's some hard wiring that goes into why we have that proclivity towards negativity. Also talk about the fallacy of rationality. If that's one thing I've learned throughout the years of working with lawyers, is that you're so steeped in, from day one of law school, in the facts of the situation. And so it's hard to shift. Having trained mediators throughout the country and into a couple of other countries for about 6 years, I know that the transition from whatever walk of life you've come from into that of a mediator, the mindset shift, is not always an easy one. For some of us, it's a rather easy transition. For others of us, it's much more challenging. I've been given the opportunity to think a lot, about what drew me into mediation. And why did I not go into law? I thought about it lots of times. I love working around the law, though, and I love the mindset that lawyers bring to the table. But there is a shift in showing up as a neutral instead of an advocate. Also touch on the 4 types of mediation most represented in the virtual world, at least according to our survey. We know that there are many out there, but what does this mean for 2021, and what can you expect to see come forth from that? And then I'll share with you the 5 top challenges that people reported both for in-person mediation as well as the virtual experience. So what I'd like to do is ask our participants to go ahead using our chat box. What is your greatest challenge in doing virtual mediation? Let's go ahead and see some responses. Again, what is your greatest challenge in doing mediations in today's work climate? So let those roll in, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. Because there is another chat box activity I want you to do. First of all, I want to bring this to you because, again, we're all hardwired in this way. And so, for example, question number 1, have you ever found yourself dwelling on an insult or fixating on your mistakes? What my experience is, it doesn't matter how mature we are, how much more seasoned we are in our respective fields, But we can all have that tendency of going down the rabbit hole when it comes to negativity. And quite frankly, many, many people do not know how to give constructive feedback without going negative or going south on us. And the impact that has on other people is amazing. Then two, do you find yourself reacting to criticisms while dismissing compliments? Again, this is a natural human tendency. And so it's important to recognize what we can do about it. Again, want to see your responses to these questions as well as my prior question about what is your biggest challenge in today's virtual mediation. Another thing, are you drawn to bad news rather than feel-good stories? I bring these questions to you not just for yourself, but to think about what's going on in the minds of your participants in mediation. We have these natural tendencies, and so people are drawn to the negative aspects. And that's why it becomes so critically important that we as mediators recognize this pattern, but then also activate our skills and strategies to redirecting, quite literally, the brain. Redirecting the neurological functioning, redirecting the release of brain hormones, particularly cortisol, which is our stress-related hormone, and how what we say or what is said in the mediation session can actually predispose people against resolution rather than for resolution. And then lastly, I'm curious. By now, many, many, many people have participated in a virtual or Zoom application of mediation. And I'd like to have you think about what happens when a participant who could either be the advocate and his or her client, or just others show sort of a bumbling kind of effect when it comes to the technology of Zoom or whatever the virtual platform might be. Or maybe you've even gotten down on yourself for not being able to manage something more effectively. Again, we have this proclivity, this natural tendency to go to the negative. And so this comes up in the mediation. Words matter. What we say matters. How we show up in the virtual arena matters. Because when our brain goes there, we do negatively impact behavior of others, the decisions they reach, and ultimately the relationships. It's not easy. I'm going to respond to a question in the chat box. It's not easy to manage impasse when meeting online. Now, I'll give you some tips, but certainly that's a much bigger topic than what this 40-minute webinar is designed to do. And I thank you for your compliments. I find it so fascinating. Partly why I didn't go into law itself. I just am fascinated with the psychology of the human condition and figuring out how to redirect. And if you followed any of my prior work, you probably know I grew up in a family of 9 kids on the younger end. So we were to be seen and not heard, and I had lots of opportunity to observe people in conflict, people saying horrible things, and then the impact it would have on the individual, self-esteem, and then also the relationship and the challenge in trying to mend or repair it. And so these are the kinds of insights and learnings that I have brought into the mediation room. And right now I'm really passionate about passing that on to people like you, because our online world is different and we don't have the ability to connect quite as easily. But I would suggest to you, particularly around impasse, actually people come into mediation in a state of impasse. They're already in conflict. They haven't been able to resolve their differences. And so how we shape the process of mediation, even before it begins, is critically important. And that's why I'm such a firm believer in using pre-mediation as a process for not only educating our online participants in the technology, starting with the advocates, but then also in connecting with the participants and making sure that we're choosing words that reflect and promote a shift in mindset to resolution. Because isn't that what the mediation process is really all about? Is shifting people in their mindset from being very positional to coming to a point of where they can at least have a dialogue and learn and understand where each is coming from an emotional perspective, not just a factual perspective. And so again, stop and look at these questions. If this goes on for you, it's definitely going on for your participants, particularly in that fourth bullet point, those who are not very adept or challenged when using Zoom. And so that's one of the things I will emphasize to you. I want to really put out there that is one of the key things that we're seeing in article after article, research study after research study, is the critical importance of doing a pre-mediation session, particularly around the Zoom or technical aspects of the medium, to prepare people so that the mediation itself is going well. Liken it to, in the old days, pre-COVID-19, where people oftentimes had to drive distances or fly. And then what about getting stuck in traffic or being hung up, not being able to get there in time, or maybe in flying, maybe weather conditions or a flight getting canceled. All of those things are upsetting, challenging. And so when you actually get into the mediation, are you really all present? No. And so if we liken those kinds of situations in the in-person world of mediation to going online, then again, walking into mediation without any preparation is akin to getting stuck in traffic and not knowing what you're doing, not knowing where you're going. And so I really want to emphasize pre-mediation preparation, both on connecting with your client, preparing them for the mediation process, but then also using the technology medium. So a little bit more about the neuroscience of conflict. And again, we are neurologically hardwired to go in this direction. As you can see, we have a fight response. And this in today's world is often verbally rather than physically. Back in the day of our predecessors, in the origins of humankind, people actually had to fight for their life in order to survive. But then we also have the flight response. Get the heck out of there as fast as you can. And that's then where we see the retreating behavior that people demonstrate in mediation. And then, of course, we have the freeze. Now, that's a newer concept in this whole drive to survive, our automatic, physiological response. But some people literally freeze. And if they freeze, they get beaten up or they get eaten up. And so these are things to consider of what's going on in our participants in mediation. And so I learned back in my early day of mediation, trying to get people to resolution, just how different people could see things so uniquely different. And that's what really led me to the study of communication styles, of which there are 4 worldwide. And so I actually engage people in communication styles assessment in almost every type of mediation that I do. Now, mine tend to be more family or workplace relationship oriented. Not to say they don't have some foundation in the law, but it's really the relationship that is at heed here. And so that study of communication styles helped me understand human behavior far more than any of my psychological training. And so here we go. It does start in the brain. Again, there are things going on neurologically as well as brain hormonally that start to impact our ability to be rational, which is up here. It does come out of instinct, a natural drive to survive through fighting, fleeing, or freezing. And I've already alluded to this, but the conflict does change our brain chemistry. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that before we go on. And when things are unpredictable, inconsistent, it leads to instability. And when we're not stable, we don't trust. And again, that really behooves the mediator then to employ tactics that will help calm things down to build trust. And that's why pre-mediation is so important. So I just want to clarify with you, when we talk about these kinds of things, I want to share with you that 93% of how we communicate is by what we see and what we hear. 93%. And what we see and what we hear doesn't go up here. It actually goes to the occipital and audial lobes at the back of our head, right next to the automatic brain or brainstem. From there, it sends signals into our body, but also sends signals back up through the brain. And as it leaves the brainstem, it hits the amygdala, which is, that's where our rush of adrenaline comes from. Then going into what we call the limbic brain. And in the limbic brain is where our cortisol, our stress hormone, gets activated, but that's also our emotion warehouse. That's where we do have our reactions of anger or freezing, whatever. And that's in the middle of the brain, between the brain stem and the prefrontal cortex, which is up here. It's up here where we are rational. And so unless we do things to redirect how people are responding in those moments and getting them to shift away from their positions from the past, we may well keep them stuck in the emotional brain. And when we're in the emotional brain, well, let me say, with logic, there's emotion, and with emotion, there's logic. But too often we try to squash the emotion in the mediation because we oftentimes don't know how to deal with it. That you can learn, my friends. That's what I'm here for. So I want to see in the chat box, if you would, which of the three natural behaviors do you see show up most in mediations? Which do you see show up most in mediations? I'd like to go ahead and see your answers. Is it more of a fight reaction that you're seeing that will tell you a lot about the communication styles involved? Or is it more of a flight reaction, people withdrawing, avoiding, not being as talkative? And perhaps you have one of each kind in the mediation. That also tells you a lot about the communication styles and what you can do. Or are you just seeing people freeze and shut up entirely? I'm curious to see what you have to say. Okay, I hear a lot of fight, right? Yeah. And so again, you might want to think about, what do I need to know more about communication styles so that I can best understand what is showing up at my mediation table and what's driving that? There are two of the four communication styles that naturally tend to fight. And then there are two that naturally tend to flee or freeze. One of the other two is naturally more of the freeze. And so I'm going to invite you all to go to my website, and I'm going to put that into our chat box. And it's because I do have a free assessment, actually three, that you can take to understand your level of emotional intelligence, to understand your communication style, and also to understand your conflict management style. So there are three little assessments. They take less than 10 minutes, but this is a great way for you to then find out what your own style is if you don't already know it. If anything, it might just be confirming for you, but you are going to get some free resources back that will then help you read where other people are coming from. This is well worth your time and investment in learning more about these four communication styles when it comes to human behavior, because I can tell you for sure it will vastly enhance your ability to manage people in the mediation session. Knowing when to take a time out, knowing what types of open-ended questions are important. Because unless we deal with this negativity bias that I'm talking about, as it says here, +1 plus -1 equals -1. Because if we stay in that situation, they're going to see the downside of things rather than the upside. And so it is a way of keeping us safe. And even though we don't have to fight or flee for our lives, our physical lives, the way we used to, our bodies and brains are still wired this way. So it vastly influences how we think rationally up here. And so we know from lots of research, and you probably have seen this in your trainings as well, we tend to have a stronger reaction to losing $20 rather than gaining $20. And I love the work of Dr. Robert Cialdini, 6 Factors of Persuasion, who goes into this in great deal and gives numerous examples in his work around this. And so again, it's really in the communications field that I've gained so much and helped me out in the mediation field. And so we tend to place greater weight on the negative aspects rather than the positive ones. And so I encourage you to think about how you might use some of these findings in your work as you show up as a mediator in terms of redirecting people and, again, facilitating their shift to resolution rather than remaining in opposition. And this, what you see here on this slide, actually comes out of the Nobel Prize winning researchers Kahneman and Tversky. And so again, things that you could look up on. And so with rationality, huge fallacy. We need to include the emotion. They work together. We cannot isolate out the intellectual elements without including the emotional. And that's really the foundation of emotional intelligence these days. That whole field of emotional intelligence has been a relatively new body of research. And when I say new, in the last 20 or 30 years, a lot of what we know today, emotional intelligence, was not even around when I was going through my graduate days back in the early 80s. And so we've come a long way, baby. And quite honestly, when we incorporate this balance between emotion and rationality, we actually make better decisions. Okay, we've really actually said, away, we could go through tons and tons and tons of facts. But if we don't incorporate, how do you really feel about that? We may never get to a fruitful outcome. And again, what I have learned in my time, that many legal professionals tend to squash emotions. But a UC Santa Barbara study, my alma mater, actually showed that moderate levels of anger were critical in helping discern between relevant and irrelevant claims. And so it's not to run away from emotion, it's learning how to manage emotion to a productive outcome that will actually get your parties reaching resolution. And that is one of the interesting things that we're finding about online mediation. I've had the opportunity to survey as well as talk to many, many people through my presentations over the last few months, in that many mediators have reported that two key things. One is that they're actually finishing mediations quicker. They're not dragging on as long. And the success rate of online mediation is actually going up. The other key factor that I want to share with you is that the emotional climate of the mediations doesn't seem to be as intense online. And the one way I explained this to Susan Guthrie, who is the online specialist on Learn How to Mediate Online, she invited me to be on her podcast back in May, pretty early in the COVID period of things. And she, as early as then, she was already getting reports from people that these three comments that I just made, quicker and greater success, resolution success, and then less emotionality. And I said, well, there's a few things that I can tell you about that. And first of all, is that when we're in a room with somebody that we're in conflict with, we can feel the heat. We can actually feel the intensity of their emotion. And just feeling that changes our own chemical basis in our brain so that we might be more on guard and less trusting, like we already talked about before. Going online, we still have emotion, but it's not the same. We don't feel the heat. And we also have found that when people are online, they don't, people tend to act better, show up better when they see the camera on them. So funny and interesting things, right? And so the thing is, emotion will happen. Don't fight it. Here's an opportunity to increase your skills. And this ties into the survey findings then that we've been learning about, and have really helped shape some new programming for 2021. So I think probably a lot of us could identify with this visual here, garbled bunch of, wires and things like that. But with, effective management and redirecting, we can come out with some clear and direct lines. And so we have come up with some practical solutions to some of the challenges we've been experiencing, new training. We are going to identify the 4 types of mediation most represented in the virtual world, at least based on our survey response. And so one of the things to then be aware of is that as as it says here, some of the implications of online mediation is the inability to assess body language. And that's the one of the ones. The next one, the highest one, is really around technical issues. And so if you think that you've learned everything you need to learn about Zoom, well, I'm here to tell you, keep on learning, okay? Because we learn more and more. Zoom and other platforms keep adding more and more features. I just learned a couple new things yesterday that, oh, wow, this is great. And then, but also how uncomfortable participants are in the online platform. And so that's why pre-mediation is so important. Don't assume that your participants have gotten to know Zoom as well as you have. And that, less than 30 days ago, well, the type of mediation I do, pretty much we've all been working towards it. I've got them pretty trained on that. I don't necessarily have to do as much pre-mediation as I used to. Quite frankly, I don't oftentimes have legal advocates in my type of mediations. It happens, but not frequently. And so one was coming in to represent the client. And, I'm thinking, gosh, we've been into this 9 months now. Didn't think I needed to educate an advocate. But, oh my gosh, it was pretty embarrassing, quite frankly. He was doing the Zoom from his phone. He'd only done Zoom one time before. And I think he may have been in his car, I'm not sure. But for most of the mediation, his phone was up here like this, and oftentimes we were actually looking up his nostrils or had this chin full of facial hair. It was, oh my gosh. And I kept trying to redirect him with the chat and to ask him to pull his phone away so we could actually see his face, not his nostrils and his beard. But he didn't know Zoom well enough to even know that. So, oops, I made a big faux pas. I did not pre-mediate and educate him on the technology. Unfortunately, it didn't make him look very professional, and I didn't really want to call him out in front of everybody too, most of whom had already been on these kinds of sessions. So it was a little bit embarrassing for him, and I was chagrined and made my apologies to everybody as well. And then the third star I put up here is the lack of pre-mediation. And so that's what it's been reported in the last few months through our surveys as key challenges with online mediation. And so what does that mean for future training? Well, you're going to see more and more training online, okay? A third of you out there said that you need more training online, and I'm going to share with you some resources. More skills in managing emotions online. More skills in communicating effectively. Now, doesn't that speak to everything I just talked about with the negativity bias? And then this is where a lot of people were really looking for some specialized help as far as, making the process more online friendly. And so I'm excited to report that we've got a great program coming up in February that's going to share a pre-mediation checklist and again provide some education. But one of the biggest things, I guess my star is not going up there right, but more strategies on how to enhance online preparation. So 64% of our respondents were looking for that. And then it's real, it's huge, Zoom fatigue. And so we used to do mediations, I know, starve them until you get to resolution, right? Well, we really can't do that today for a number of reasons. One is we have to be sensitive to people who do have sugar imbalances that need to eat more frequently. The other thing is that because there's so much visual display going on that our eyes trying to manage and track all of the stuff going on is fatiguing to our brain. And so it's really important that you build in breaks more regularly and consistently. So Zoom fatigue is real. So number one, more strategies on how to enhance the online experience, and then also tips on how to minimize Zoom fatigue. And of course, then those others. So there's a lot more we need to learn and continue learning, because how we're doing Zoom today is very different than we were doing it back in early March or mid-March and April. How we do Zoom in 6 more months will be even more advanced and developed than where we are today. So again, my message, don't stop learning. Oh, there's it. Now the star comes up. There we go. Okay. And so the types of mediation most represented, you can see civil has been the largest response to our survey so far. So you can expect to see more civil applications of online mediation in the future. And again, the program I've been partnering with for AAA mediation.org just released their announcement and registration for that program just, I think, early Monday of this week. And so we definitely address the civil applications. And I think you're going to find it a fascinating program, multifaceted, multi-party webinar series. And so 12 hours total, so over 3 weeks time. So definitely look into that. Go to AAAmediation.org for more information. And then commercial was the second area, followed by family, and then slightly behind that, employment. Now, obviously, we have a lot of other areas of mediation covered here, but at the same time, where we're seeing the most mediation going on are in the civil and commercial area, followed by family and employment. And so I particularly do a lot around family and employment, and continue to bring my knowledge and expertise to that area. But certainly, there are many elements of mediation that can be applied across the board. Okay. So here are some opportunities I want you to be aware of coming up. I've already mentioned the AAAmediation.org program starting in February. And this is where I mentioned earlier on, if you join our LinkedIn group, the Agile Lawyer, the Agile Mediator, you can access webinar recordings like the one today, listen to again, along with many other great resources. Also want to, again, this is the program I was talking about, starts on February 6th through the 20th. And again, through the AAA Education Services. And that's been a fascinating experience. We're actually doing some recordings right now. And then you can also register for our meeting coming up on January 21st, where you'll get all the details of the results and where we see that going. We actually have an application in to present to the ABA spring conference in April. We are closing the survey now at the end of this year, but we're expanding it in the first of 2021 to take on some new elements to see where the field has been going. And then for educational purposes, I want to acquaint you, Zoom has some great programs, okay? And so this is a link new to working from home. And actually that's where I found some new tips, because they're continuing to advance and design their platform. There's so much more available today than there was 9 months ago. Pretty amazing. And then I also want to put a plug in for my friend and colleague, Susan Guthrie. She's been at it for several years, sort of out of necessity. And so she has a wonderful self-directed program you can take to learn to mediate online. And then I also want to offer that I've been working a lot with professionals to help fine-tune their online presence, fine-tune their pre-mediation checklists, fine-tune how they do pre-mediations, even looking at how to build in pre-mediations into your mediation fee schedule. And so I tend to do that one-on-one, so it's private, confidential, and customized. But I could also bring together, if you had a small group of people that you wanted to do in a group setting, we could do that as well. And so I do offer the virtual mediator session here as well. So I do encourage you to sign up for the Agile Lawyer, Agile Mediator LinkedIn group so you can get free access to this. Now, if you as I realize that the exact URLs did not show up here. If you'd like me to send those to you, I'd be happy to do that, so you have them electronically, and that way you won't have to worry about looking up how to do this. So if you want to put your response, if you'd like me to send these last couple of slides to you so you can gain access to some of the links, go ahead and put yes into the chat box, and I'll be happy to follow up with you later on. And so just building on what I've already mentioned, again, this has been a rather recent development that came out of the requests of people just like you. It wasn't my original plan, but I do love working one-on-one. I do love educating people. And so what you do get with me are 2 one-hour one-on-one sessions. I do walk you through the techniques and strategies for managing high emotions, looking at some of the negativity and unconscious bias that comes up. And I also take a look at the basics of Zoom, how to brand your platform, how to send out customized emails, how to use some other resources to really enhance the confidentiality of it, but also really make you look like the specialist that you are. And so what I'd like to do is, we've got a few more moments here before we wrap up. And so any particular questions that you have that you can put into the chat box. Any particular questions? And I also invite you to think about what did you gain from this session. And if you would, be so kind to share your experience by posting a review on my Facebook page, which is, as you can see here, or write a recommendation on LinkedIn. With that, I want to say a very big thank you for being here today. And I'm wishing you the very best in this holiday season. It certainly is a most unprecedented holiday season, and I'm sure we're all trying to figure out what we're going to do. And so I also encourage you, if you want to follow, I've got some great articles that have been coming out, and I'm excited about them anyway, and they've been well received. Also have some ebooks now available. And so if you'd like to subscribe and get access to those things before they hit the big press, I invite you to subscribe to join my community. So again, I'm Dr. Debra Dupree, the Mindset Doc, and welcome you to joining the Agile Lawyer, Agile Mediator LinkedIn group. And let's all grow our skills together. We're in a new world, in a new time, and people are still people. Thank you so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. And again, just as a reminder, the recording will be available in the Agile Lawyer, Agile Mediator LinkedIn group.